All right. Well, it is 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and people will be coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started here. Welcome to Oliver Gospel's first online webinar. We are so glad you're here. This is actually the first of 4 summer webinars. I hope you'll join us for the next one in June. Our hope is just to offer more education to the community, people like you, especially around poverty and practical ways to help. So if you're new to Oliver Gospel, I just wanted to give a quick introduction of who we are. Oliver Gospel, we are a Christ-centered ministry, primarily serving those experiencing homelessness or poverty. We've been around since 1888. That's incredible. Whether it's through our men's center or Toby's Place for women and children, we also have the thrift store and our new coffee shop. We want to offer hope, love, and opportunity to everyone who comes through our doors. That's why we not only offer resources to meet physical needs, maybe such as shelter, medicine, and food, but we also offer significant relationships that help men and women grow professionally and spiritually. It's really encapsulated in our mission, engaging and transforming lives together through the power of Christ's love. So as we're getting started here, just want to do some introductions. And we're actually going to start with you, the audience. We want to hear from you during this webinar. So as I'm introducing your hosts today, please put in the chat, do that right now, your name, where you're from, and your favorite thing about Oliver Gospel. I'd love to hear from you as I'm just doing some introductions here. I'll start with myself. My name is Will Huff, and I am the Donor Relations Officer at Oliver Gospel. I love connecting with donors just like you and helping you stay connected with Oliver Gospel in a meaningful way. I'm not from Colombia originally. I actually grew up in Japan where my parents were missionaries. But now I live in Irmo with my beautiful wife, Emily. I think she's watching actually. Hello, you're beautiful. And our 9-month-old daughter, who just is such a joy in our life right now. I'm speaking with Mindy Jameson. She is the Director of Transformation here at Oliver Gospel. That means she is the Director of all programming at the Men's Center and Toby's Place for women and children. She is the real star of the show today. She's our resident expert. She has spent her life serving the Lord and has a distinct calling on her life to serve those experiencing poverty. She's worked with churches, agencies, and communities focused on fighting generational poverty for more than 25 years now. In addition to her extensive hands-on experience, Mindy, she holds a bachelor's in social work from Carson Newman University and a Master of Divinity from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. She is called by God to be present with the hurting and help lead others to do the same. So suffice to say, I'm very excited for you to hear what she has to say today. Thank you for your participation in the chat. I see a lot of names I know actually. We're so glad to spend some time with you here today. Just a last note before we begin. Today, our theme is homelessness, causes, and understanding. And I'll be asking Mindy some questions. She'll be pulling from her expertise and role here at Oliver Gospel. Really, the goal is Mindy's going to help us understand some of the causes of homelessness in order to increase our understanding and empathy. So that's exciting. The format is simple. It's an interview style. And during the webinar, we want to hear from you. We really want your questions. So as we're talking, you're not interrupting. This is allowed to talk over us in the chat box during the webinar today. Please put your questions in the chat for Mindy as the webinar is going on, because we will have actually a time at the end for a Q&A with Mindy. As time allows, we'll answer questions. Hopefully we'll be able to hit a few there, but please put your questions in the chat as we're talking. And then lastly, before we jump in, for the purposes of this webinar, we do need to speak generally, to use generalizations. Please know that when we use terms like poverty or homelessness, we are not going to represent each person's individual story with 100% accuracy. However, our hope is that through this webinar, we really can shed some light and even break some stereotypes today that help increase empathy and understanding. So let's jump in. Mindy, I've done a lot of talking, so it's your turn now. I want you to help me finish introducing you. Tell us a bit about yourself and maybe your family, where you're from, and why Oliver Gospel for you.
Well, it's so good to be with you all, and this is our first webinar, so we're super psyched. So I'm glad you all are here. I have served on the mission field for about 20 years, serving a vulnerable community in Des Moines, Iowa. I know when you think of vulnerable communities, you think of Des Moines, but there's a huge population there of people that live in generational poverty, and many people that are from all over the world, refugees that we served for 20 years. And then we moved to Columbia, my husband and myself, and we have a 15-year-old, just a 15-year-old. Soon we'll be driving, so you can pray for that. 15-year-old daughter, Maggie. And we lived here for about 3.5 years. And before coming to this, I saw a lot of Greenville people on there. Before coming to this, I worked at Jumpstart, which is a prison ministry in Spartanburg. And it's a fabulous ministry. So I was partnered with SCDC, went on the inside and did some prison ministry there. So came to Oliver Gospel, just really love being a part of building relationships here with people that are experiencing vulnerability, whether through homelessness or generational poverty or just a lot of trauma has brought them to this place. So I've been here for 3.5 months now. So I'm excited to serve through Oliver Gospel.
And I'm one of many that is so glad you're here, Mindy. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say today. And just thank you for being at Oliver Gospel. We really appreciate you. So we'll kind of go into this first question. And this is just a good starting point for us as we begin our conversation today, Mindy. Tell us a bit about, because we all have pictures that come to mind, but just from your experience, and what is homelessness? And just as a follow-up question, how does Oliver Gospel define poverty?
Well, I think moving forward, we're going to define poverty as really to the extent an individual goes without. And people in poverty and generational poverty specifically tend to lack in areas that maybe you wouldn't think of. And when we define poverty, a lot of times we think of the material poor. They don't have stuff, or they don't have things, or they don't have financial resources, but really it's all resources, lack of coping skills, lack of positive role models, maybe it's spiritual poverty, and of course it is financial, but it's really this idea of a lack of resources, lack of support is a huge one. And so when we think about homelessness, it ties into that same lack of resources, but then it includes this piece of not having stable housing. There is a huge need for affordable housing. And some of our residents have issues with mental health, and they need some wraparound services. They might not be able to keep that apartment once they get it. So homelessness is a broad term, but for us, it's anyone who hasn't had stable housing in the last 6 months, the last year. That's how we kind of define it.
That's very helpful. I think especially that definition of poverty, the extent to which someone goes without, I think it's very easy to resort to kind of a simple, okay, someone doesn't have enough money. But I think that captures more. And I really like that definition. Thank you for that. Okay, kind of going off of that, could you tell us a bit about what are some of the causes of poverty, and then maybe even more specifically homelessness?
Yeah, I think some of the causes would relate to this idea of lack of affordable housing, lack of housing period, but then affordable, safe, and is available to someone who might have a very fixed income or no income at all, trying to battle that every day. So this idea of the affordable housing, safe and affordable housing, there's a lack of that. The other big thing is broken relationships. And so many people come to us that have experienced homelessness or in generational poverty because they don't have that support piece. You know, maybe you and I could, if we lost our job, or if we had a mental health episode, or if we had something going on in our life, we could rely on our family or our friends. And for most of our people, they have either gone through all of those support systems and those are no longer an option for them, or they never had them in the first place. And so they don't have kind of that safety net that we might have or we've experienced growing up in a healthy situation, maybe a middle class or a wealthy class situation, but broken relationships. And then the last piece is really broken systems, a system that is biased, and in some cases, a system that is racist. And so people experience homelessness and poverty due to broken systems and broken relationships.
That's fantastic. And I think, my goodness, that is a great answer. Okay, wow, we're going to keep going. Let's see. The next question is, when we talk about individuals facing homelessness, because again, we all have that picture in our mind, but who are we really talking about? And do you have any maybe personal experiences or personal stories that you'd be willing to share with us today?
Sure. Yeah. When we talk about people experiencing homelessness, we're talking about mothers, we're talking about women, we're talking about children, babies, we're talking about veterans, so many of our veterans, we're talking about men. And I think the biggest surprise to people is we're talking about the working poor. You know, you can have a minimum wage job and still not make that livable wage, which is about $17 an hour. So you really have to have two full-time minimum wage jobs to make that livable wage.
Wow.
And it could be someone with an education that just is experiencing homelessness. I had a friend who was a social worker and she worked on contracts. And when that contract was up, her and her child, they only had so much savings. And, you know, she had a degree, she was working. And so one of the stories I want to tell you about, though, about people facing homelessness or that have lived in homelessness for a while. And I think with Oliver Gospel, the thing I want to communicate today is that the stories and the faces that you see and maybe some of the bias that maybe you've had in the past, or maybe what you think is homelessness, I really would love to challenge that, in that so many people that we serve have just been a regular person and trauma has hit them, or the job market failed them, that affordable housing piece. And so sometimes we feel like, you know, they might be a harmful person, they might be somebody who is dangerous or a criminal, and really it's not the case. And, you know, of course, there's those exceptions, but I met a guy named Tommy, and he lives here in Columbia. And he's been homeless for quite some time. He was a veteran, and I would consider him a friend. And moving forward, our hope is that we'll build mutual, real relationships with those that we serve, and we move away from kind of a helper-receiver model, but more of a let's come together and let's be mutual friends with healthy boundaries. And so Tommy was that to me, and he would come in and we would chat. He attended a church that I attended, and we were talking one day, just having conversation. And he found out it was my daughter's birthday that week. And we were talking about it. She's growing up, that type of thing. He left, and he came back the next day, and he had bought a brand new Bible, and he wrote in there just an inscription: read this every day, and I'm praying for you while you read God's word. And that just touched her so much that he would do that. He would sacrifice whatever very fixed income. You know, he lived in the woods. But he sacrificed for us. And so there was this give and take with him and I. It was very equal, very even. We would have lunch together, you know, and I think that that's the piece that I really would love for people to engage in here, is to get to know our people on a really personal level. Because when we think that we are serving them, we're misguided in that it can go both ways, and it should go both ways. because God's made people in his image with his gifts and skills. And so that's just one story about a friend of mine. I have another story if you want to hear it, Will.
Oh, definitely. And that's a fantastic
It's
story.
from
Keep going.
my time in seminary in New Orleans. I worked at a homeless shelter in New Orleans and a drug and alcohol recovery center there. And a man came in to our center there, our shelter, and he had been a postal worker his entire life. And he was, a professional. He was well liked at his job. He went to eat one night with his son. And this is before Katrina in New Orleans. It's just so much crime. And sitting in the car with his son eating fast food or something. And his son was involved in a crime, just a drive-by kind of shot, and he watched his son die in front of him. Yeah. Well, because of that trauma and the grief, it overwhelmed him so much so that he couldn't get up and go to work. He lost his job, and then he lost his housing, of course. And he had a job that he had for 20 years or something. So when he came to us, I was young, I was still in school, I just remember the overwhelming feeling of that could be me, that could be me. If I watched my child die in front of me, who's to say that I wouldn't be able to function because of that grief and that trauma? And so you may not have this bias in your head of what someone looks like that's homeless. You may fully be aware that it could be anyone, it could be all of us. But I think it's important to highlight those stories of people that have just walked through life and life is just beating them down. Yes. And it's very difficult when you're traumatized to think clearly, to make decisions that make sense, to plan ahead. And that's a lot of who we're serving.
Definitely. Wow. Those are powerful stories, Mindy. And I'm so glad you shared, just to really stress that this is a mutually beneficial relationship. This is not a I'm here to save you kind of thing. It's, wow, we both are benefiting from this friendship, really. I think that's exceptional. Really honing in on that. This is my favorite question. Tell me, because I think, this turns our assumptions about what our gospel does on its head. Okay. And how could you tell us how personal relationships with those in poverty have healed and helped you? I know you kind of touched on that just now, but really, could you just go into that a bit deeper with us?
Sure. Well, for serving on the field for 20 years in a community that was vulnerable, when I first went to the field, I felt very comfortable in my education, and I felt very secure in that what I was bringing was going to be so helpful, and that everybody had been waiting for it, and I quickly learned no one was waiting for my wisdom or my abilities. And so that community began to really school me very gently in what it means to walk alongside someone that has either been in crisis or has had a lot of trauma and is vulnerable. And a part of that healing for me was that I really came to the mission field and any mission trip, and maybe you can relate to this if you've been out on the field or taken a mission trip. We really go with the answers. And, I learned quickly that I needed to be a learner, and I humble myself and be a learner, because people in poverty know more what it's like to live in poverty than someone just coming in from the inside helping them out.
Yep.
Experts. They're the experts on their experience.
That's right.
So for me, it healed me, and that it took away the ego. And it took away, and it created a vulnerability in me that God has used to build real and true, authentic relationships. And, while we were on the field, we had family members pass away. We had different things happen to us. We were isolated on the field, and we had to rely on others for all kinds of things. And so when you rely on someone in poverty within healthy boundaries, of course, when you rely on them, it's something that no agency has ever done. They just usually, you come, you receive, and you leave. But when I say to you, hey, how can I pray for you? And then I say to them, can you pray for me?
Mm,
I just lost my grandma, or I'm going through this. And then they do pray for you. That's the kingdom of God. That's the kingdom of God.
yes.
When we can share together those really vulnerable pieces of ourselves, I think that's just such a beautiful thing that God allows us to do. And so I made it a point to, like, I'm never going to ask, can I pray for you, if I'm not willing to share something from me that's appropriate, but that invites that person into my vulnerability. Because if I just go and I've got the answers and I know everything, it really puts a wall up between
Yes.
the people we're serving. So I think vulnerability was a big piece for me, and just being
Mhm,
I don't have to have all the answers. I just need to be present, and
mhm.
I need to be a listener. Those things were very helpful for me. And I think, there's so many stories that we can share, that how God just used people to heal me. And I will share one. There was a man at the center where we served, some special needs. He also had some mental health issues too. But he would come and he would knock on the door and we would chat with him. And he would always say to me, and it was always on the day that I needed it, it was either a Bible verse or it was, Mindy, Jesus is coming back soon. He's coming back soon. So don't worry and don't fret. And he would leave. And every time I would cry, and he would come about once a week or once every 10 days, but it was always the exact time. And for us to assume that God will not use someone that we serve here, the least of these, or these things that we say, the needy. I don't love that term, the needy, because I know that God has used people in my life to speak to me,
Yes.
just the Holy Spirit speaking through them, that society would say, you don't have anything to offer. You don't have anything to give us. But really the flip side of that is we absolutely need them. The church needs this community. We need the women at Toby's Place. We need the men here at Oliver Gospel, because the Lord can use anyone. He can work through anyone. And so I think sometimes we assume that we're the helpers, we got the answers, and maybe I'm the only one in that, and I'm just a judge. And so, but I learned that lesson, that, don't ever assume, and be open and vulnerable, and let God use that. And it's
Mm,
a blessing in my life and in my family's life to
mhm.
God use someone who others may think they don't have much to offer, but God says, yes, I've created you. I want to use you.
Wow. And I think your vulnerability even now, Mindy, is a great example to all of us, because I was thinking about, as you're answering that, just if we're not willing to be vulnerable, how could we ask someone else to be vulnerable with us?
Right.
It's asking of someone else something we're not willing to do. That's not only not fair, it's not good relationship, it's not good friendship. Um,
Right.
and
It's
so
one-sided. Mm-hmm.
it's one-sided relationship, exactly. And in the end, it doesn't serve either person well.
That's right.
Um, so thank you for your example in that, and just for being so open with us even now. Um, so this is really the last question before we go into a Q&A. So if you haven't yet put a question in the chat box, please do, because we'd love to maybe see if we can answer a few here. This has been really great. So here's the final question. What are some ways, um, well, this is the second to last question actually, but how difficult is it to get out of poverty? And tell me a bit about what are some of the obstacles someone might face? Because I think it's just easy to think or stereotype, like, okay, why doesn't someone just get a job, right? Um,
Yes.
is it really that easy, Mindy? Or, what are the obstacles someone faces?
Yeah, some of my training comes from Ruby Payne and Toxic Charity and When Helping Hurts. And there is even a book that Ruby Payne has called Just Get a Job, just because I think that's what a lot of people do. You just get a job, it'll all work out. And we've already talked about that livable wage, how that piece, you can get a job and it still not be enough, right? But I think it's very difficult for someone to move out of poverty. And it's almost 2 steps forward, 20 steps back. And
Mm,
so really all of we need the community, because we need these circles of support. So when someone gets out of Toby's Place and they end up staying in the community, we need people to rally around them and not break boundaries or do things that are appropriate, but we need people to be supportive and help with childcare or help with transportation. Those types of pieces are so important for someone trying to move out of poverty and into more of a middle class, stable kind of environment. It's very, very difficult. It's not impossible, but it can only be done in community and with support. Somebody just can't go out and generally do that on their own. The obstacles that they face, again, is just that they have to be able to deal with their trauma. They've got to work through that. And both at Toby's and at Oliver Gospel, we're trying to give people that kind of space to work through those things. They have to be able to find affordable housing. And that's one thing. If you're listening and you're in Columbia and you own an apartment building, man, we would love to talk with you, because we need second chance employers. We need second chance housing. Some of our people need that second chance and be able to afford housing. And I think, if the obstacles can be very large to face on your own, but in community and with support, once they leave here, it's really a key spot for us to plug in and to walk alongside people.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And really, this is our last question, but you really did touch on this a little bit. Just tell me, if you could sum up, what is Oliver Gospel's approach to helping someone out of poverty or homelessness?
Yeah, I think, let me chat about one other thing that is a concept from Movie Pain. It's a Bridges Out of Poverty, if you're interested.
Great book.
People move out of poverty. Yeah, people move out of poverty for 4 reasons. The first one is it's too painful to stay. They just have some kind of inner resiliency and they pull themselves up and they are able to move on. Super rare, very slim chance that that people are able to do that on their own. The second is a skill or a talent, like they can play football or they can sing or something like that, and that kind of shoots them through up into the middle class or the wealthy class. Again, really rare. The last 2 are where we are, Oliver Gospel, and hopefully our volunteers that walk alongside of us, and that's a vision. Someone has given a person that's living in poverty or homelessness a vision for their life. Like, it can be different. It can look like this. A lot of times teachers do that for children in poverty. They expose them to something. But by the time people get to us, that's something that we do. Hey, you're so good at this. Have you ever thought about this? And, you can do these things. You can change your mindset and really be willing to do that. And then the last thing is a key relationship. So people move out of poverty because they have a key relationship with someone who can help support them. And that's really what we're doing through Toby's Place. It's a 1.5-year program. We've changed our programming. We've changed our schedule. We're doing new things. And we invite volunteers to walk alongside of us. But those women and children are getting that support for a 1.5 years to really launch into the next phase of their life with a housing, with a job, and with the skills to live life and to be supported. And same with the men in recovery. They're here a year and they're getting support while they're here. They have aftercare when they leave. And so those are big, important pieces. Just that support piece, I cannot stress how important that is.
I love that. So Oliver Gospel can be the significant relationship that someone needs to get out of poverty. Would that be fair? Okay, love that. Absolutely. And honestly, I'll say to those watching, you could too. I think that, you don't have to be Oliver Gospel, quote unquote. You don't have to be a staff member to be a friend of someone. That's something we can all do. It's a very human thing. And if the research is telling us, it is, that's what Mindy just said, a significant relationship is one of the ways out of poverty. I think that's really challenging to me personally. I hope it's challenging to you as well, because I think we can look around us and think, okay, who is in my circle or even just right outside my circle that I could be a friend to? I think that's something to think and pray about for sure. But okay, I'm excited for this. So we're in the Q&A section now. And, a lot of you may be taking a lunch break for this, so we won't take too much time. We're just going to hit a few questions if we can. If you haven't already, feel free to put some questions in the chat box and we'll just kind of hit a few here. The first one, This is from, I got a direct message about this, and this one's kind of fun. Maybe fun is the wrong word. It's a great question. Thank you for your vulnerability here. This person says, one of my faults is lack of empathy for the homeless. My depraved nature is included to judge the folks I see begging on the street corners. Wow, thank you so much for this. What suggestions can you or Mindy offer to help me gain empathy so that I can better feel and understand what these folks are going through? Thank you for this question. This is a great question. So Mindy, you wanna take that on?
Yeah, I absolutely do not think you're alone in that feeling because,
Mhm.
and I would say that's a bias, right? You're not sure where that money's going, you're not sure what's happening. And the greatest way to tear down any bias is to get to know someone. Just get to know someone that is experiencing homelessness, get to know someone that's living in generational poverty. You will hear their story, you will understand some of the causes of what led them to that place. And the best thing to lower judgment is to raise your compassion. And so the only way to raise that compassion is to have a personal experience with someone. Just like race or anything else, any other things that we deal with, if we know someone personally, all bets are off. We decide, hey, someone talks about a bias, we're like, hey, that's not been my experience. I met so and so, and they're experiencing homelessness because of a trauma. They lost their child or whatever it might be. And so I think getting to know someone personally, and Oliver Gospel gives you that opportunity to come down, serve a meal, hang out, hear some stories, get to know some guys, come over to Toby's place, hold a baby, all those kind of ideas will go away. They'll kind of fall to the wayside and you'll know someone personally. Now, there are exceptions of people out there scamming and that type of thing, but I am here to tell you with my whole entire adult life serving this population, people that are scamming, people that are running a game, it's 1%, it's 2%. Everyone else, they have a story, and we can't judge them for those couple people that kind of mess everything up. So really, if you get in there and you get to know someone, I think all that'll go away.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Mindy. And there's actually a follow-up question I just saw come in that I think would be really good. So if someone approaches you on the street for money, etc., this person here, Steve, says, I've referred them to OGM, sometimes offered money or food or prayer. Do you have any advice that you could share, Mindy, about how to help someone who approaches you on the street?
Yeah, a couple of things that I do. If I'm driving in my car, I always have snacks in my car to hand out to guys that are, they call it, I think they call it flying a flag, or when they have a flag out or a sign out, begging essentially.
Yes.
So I usually have in my car like a bottle of water, chapsticks and snacks, things like that, sunscreen, so that I can hand them something. And then I'll usually say, hey, if you're looking for a bed tonight, call down at Oliver Gospel, call Transitions. I'll try to give them several opportunities. Or if you can't remember any of that, if you have some snacks or you have some things that you're carrying around, that's great. And if you can remember 211, 211 is United Way's helpline, and it has resources for the whole Midlands or for anywhere, for the whole state of South Carolina. So if you're traveling, I was in Savannah and a person approached me and I said, hey, give 211 a call. And most people have a cell, they have a free cell that they've received. Or they can go in and use a phone, and they'll give them all the resources, the times, what you need to bring in order to come and stay. So 211 is a great resource for that. Or of course, tell Oliver Gospel, let them know that we're here. They can come by and talk with us.
That's great. And I think you just touched on this too. We partner with many organizations in Columbia. Our goal is anyone that comes to our door, whether we're able to serve them, if we're a good fit for them or not, we will always refer them to some place that would be a good fit for them in whatever their need might be. Okay, so from Robin and Donna, I actually just saw them last week. Good to see you again. You mentioned that broken relationships contribute to homelessness. I know that it can vary with each individual, but in general, how does Oliver Gospel help its residents restore some of those relationships? It's a great question.
Yes. So it really would depend on where they're at, but at Toby's place within case management, one of our goals is family reconciliation, if at all possible. Yesterday in my office, a man came in and we wrote letters to his family and we mailed those off because he wants to make amends. He wants to do right by them. He needs their support. And so if we can help people kind of bridge those gaps with their family and seek forgiveness or whatever it might be, or just rebuild that relationship, then that will keep them from being homeless. They can go and stay with their son or daughter. They can go and stay with their mother or whomever it might be. So we're having those conversations through case management and through, of course, our recovery. And even guys that stay in our refresh and rebuild program, our emergency shelter, having those kind of conversations of, making peace with those that might be able to offer you support.
Yep, absolutely. And this will be our last question from Miriam. She says, I'm new to all this. How does someone join the programs at Oliver Gospel? How do they know about us? And what does that process look like?
Yeah. So people are referred to us all kinds of ways. The hospital, social workers, they walk in, a family member calls, churches refer a lot of people to us. And so they can call and ask about our programs. They can stop by. If they are a woman or a child, they can call. We'll refer them to Toby's. They'll get an assessment. If they're a man looking for recovery, we'll do an assessment and an intake on them. And then if they're just looking for a bed in our emergency shelter, they can call and see if we have beds available. So we really want them to call because that's empowering and that's good for them to seek the help themselves. But as far as a referral, a lot of those things come from other people, social workers, churches.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Mindy. And I hope that
thank you
to everyone. Let me just say thank you all so much for joining us today. What a great start to our webinar series. You'll actually see in the chat right now the registration link for our next webinar. It's June 26th. You'll see it on the link. I think it's June 26th. It's kind of a part 2, homelessness, how to help. And we're going to take a deeper dive with our connections manager on, how to more practically help someone in need. Just also want to let you know this webinar was presented by the Champion Society. That is a society at Oliver Gospel made up of donors who donate monthly or quarterly. And they are a huge help to us. They sustain us as we continue to help more people and grow. You'll see the link there in the chat box. Champions do receive limited solicitations, a 20% off discount card at the roastery for a whole year. That's incredible. And personalized monthly updates on the growth of Oliver Gospel. So if you're interested in learning more, please see the link in the chat. And Mindy, real quick, could you just say the books again that you mentioned?
Yes, so some great books. You can go to AHA Process, which is Ruby Payne. That's not Christian material. It's just educational material. Ruby Payne, AHA Process, and what every church member should know about poverty is where I would start there. And then, of course, Toxic Charity, When Helping Hurt, great resources.
Great, and I'm putting those in the chat box now. Great books. I'm actually reading a Ruby Payne book right now. It's fantastic, and it's also very challenging.
Yes.
But thank you all for coming today. If you're looking for ways to get involved, please feel free to connect with me. My information is on the screen right now. I'd love to talk to you personally, maybe grab a coffee, maybe take you on a tour. And you can always visit us at our website, olivergospel.org. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Mindy.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yes, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week.